So I think it was Jenny who asked me yesterday to review this, to review how I color coded this. And I think Jenny mentioned that she might not be here today, and I don't see her at this point in time, but she said she'd go back and watch the recording. But for those of you who might benefit from kind of walking through this, this was a quote that I asked you to read with me. It is color coded by phrases and clauses. And I did this just to make the point that this is what we would expect our students to do, right, as they're reading. But of course, it's going to depend on how accurate and automatic they are with the words in the first place. And then, are they able to monitor their comprehension as they're reading, right? Because that's what you have to do to be able to group these words in grammatical entities. As far as how I color coded this, there's no one way to do this, but if you want to just know kind of my logic, I highlighted the subject, right? Exposure to book language is the subject of this sentence. Exposure, what kind of exposure? It's to book language. Provides opportunities, that's my verb, right? My verb phrase, because I have a verb and an object. To experience words and sentences. This is something called an infinitive. Now, just to refresh our memories on infinitives, if that's an uncommon word, I'm not teaching this terminology to the students, but for us to understand, this is that website I shared with you yesterday, Purdue OWL, and this is all the different links that you could click on to learn everything that you want to know, but we're afraid to ask about writing, especially with regard to grammar. If I scroll down here, I get to gerunds, participles, and infinitives. And if I click on infinitives, I see it's a verbal consisting of the word to plus a verb. So to wait seemed foolish. Everyone wanted to go. His ambition is what? To fly. So you can see that these infinitives are in all, I mean, they serve as different parts of speech, if you will. This is the direct object. This is a subject complement. In this case, he lacked the strength to resist is an adjective. But again, it's the word to with a verb, but it serves the role of being an adjective. Why? Because it tells us about the strength. That's the adjective. It tells us more about, the noun, the strength. It tells us more about which strength it is. It's the strength to resist. In this case, we must study to learn. Why are we studying? We're studying to learn. So that's an adverb question. I hope that helps make sense, because infinitives are pretty elusive. But, I find that website to be wonderful, very helpful, because it'll define the term, but then it really gives lots of examples, which is really helpful. So going back to this example, provides opportunities. What kind of opportunities? In this case, to experience words and sentences would be an adjective, right? It's serving the role of an adjective because it's describing the opportunities. That's a noun. That are rarely encountered in conversations. Now, we talked about relative clauses yesterday. The relative clause is a clause. Remember, a clause has a subject and a predicate. So we have that, which is the pronoun that is referring back to sentences. Which sentences? The sentences that are rarely encountered in conversations. So that is your relative clause that includes a prepositional phrase, right? So this is complicated stuff, but just think about the role. That's all you need to worry about for your students. What role is it serving? They're rarely encountered where? In conversation. So that's an adverbial prepositional phrase. Now we have a new sentence. these systematic differences, that's our noun phrase, what kind of differences? They're systematic. What do? They start early in life and are evident. So we have start and are evident. We have a compound predicate. And another prepositional phrase. They're evident where? In the books children hear, in the context of shared reading. So another adverbial phrase. From infancy onward, a prepositional phrase. So you can see I've highlighted in green some of these prepositional phrases, but in these clauses, we also have prepositional phrases. So I don't want you to get bogged down in this highlighting thing. Do what is helpful for your students. On the first day, I transcribed some of the sentences that you put into the chat. And I was highlighting certain things. I'm only allergic to one thing, right? I was highlighting here prepositional phrases, right? Over the lake, to one thing, with delight. In this one, we have of the most diverse countries. One is really not part of that phrase. So I should unhighlight that. Whoops. Whoop. You get the point. Okay. In the world, another prepositional phrase. This actually should be highlighted in yellow, but I was going, sort of fast through these sentences to make a point. And I was also highlighting verbs. I was highlighting some conjunctions because in this case, I asked you to find a compound sentence and you gave me good examples of compound sentences. So this is a strategy that you could use with your students, as I said before, getting one of their sentences and putting it up on a smart board or a way that you can illustrate a point that you're making. It's very effective when you use the student sentences themselves, because then you can sort of diagnostically see where their confusions might lie. I hope that was helpful. Is there any questions? Heidi, you got bogged down in this highlighting thing. What is always referring to? It's okay.
I was just saying that when I'm preparing things for students, I always spend way too much time trying to highlight because I'm like, oh, there's a prepositional phrase, but it's inside this other thing. Should I make that a different color? Shouldn't I? And so it's a complicated thing because language is complicated, and how do we make it so the students can understand is always where I, eventually make my decision.
And that's a wise choice. One of the things that we haven't talked about in the last couple of days is diagramming. Diagramming is something that I did, right, in my early years in grammar school. And by the way, we called them grammar schools because we were learning about grammar, I guess, among other things. But I loved diagramming. It made sense to me, but there are some people who thought it was very confusing. So, there's a range in how useful these strategies are for our students, and we have to think about that. Is this color coding useful for students? This was absolutely not something I would do for a student necessarily. This was for your edification to think about phrases and clauses, because that was something that I think was confusing to many of you. And it's still confusing to me at times. I have to think about it. But so to your point, Heidi, we have to think about how much time is spent in prep and what's the return on your investment in terms of your students' ability to kind of, use that color coding effectively. I would suggest to them that if it's helpful, they do it. And if it isn't, they don't, right? I'm a pragmatic person. All right, so today we're going to focus on written expression. And before I do that, I wanted to talk for just a moment about phrasing, because I gave this short shrift yesterday. And I really wanted to acknowledge the fact that in order to read in grammatical entities and in order to comprehend what you read, kids have to look at punctuation marks. And that's not something they're good at doing necessarily. So just for a second, let's think about the fact that punctuation does matter. So how would you punctuate the first sentence? And if you want to put that in the chat, that would be great. I could look at what you think. And Beth, I'll come back to your question, okay? Something that we probably will also talk about tomorrow when we talk about where this all fits in. Father called Billy a football. So you would put quotation marks around father and a football, is that right, Diane? I'm assuming that's what you were, yeah, okay. And then you might even have an exclamation mark at the end because the football is heading right for his head. Is there another way you could punctuate that? Could you just leave it that way? And father called Billy a football. He said, "You're like a football." Sure, right? So there, if there's no punctuation, that might be how it would be interpreted. Excellent. How about the next one? Could put quotation marks around that little girl, right? And then a comma, said her mother is hungry. Or you could leave it out. That little girl said her mother is hungry. Who's hungry? Right? Depends on how you punctuate it. So punctuation does matter, and there's examples, there's exercises you can find like this. Yeah, good, Beth. Exactly. Her mother is hungry. Good. And that's the other way to do it, Martha. Excellent. So it's good for kids, give kids sentences like this and ask them to put the punctuation marks and then have them intonate the way that they punctuated it. Because that's oral language and oral expression is a very important part of prosody. The doctor said his friend is ill. Another example where you have split quotations. You could, right? The doctor is the first part of the quotation, is ill is the second. Or you could punctuate it differently. Doctor said his friend is ill. And the last one is funny. Let's do the last one. Everybody contribute to the last one. Not everyone, just whoever wants to. Nice, Rebecca. Nice. Thank you for doing it both ways, Tanya. It's from a movie. I'm not sure, but I thought it was funny and good. We don't have any, do we have any men in our midst? Well, I don't know if we have. This is such a profession dominated by women, isn't it? So we can talk about, we can trash men if we want. No, I'm kidding. Just kidding. All right. So punctuation does matter. In our syntax book, the professional learning series, we actually have a section devoted to punctuation. And you know what I'll do? I will send you tomorrow in day 4, I will add my activities for explicitly teaching punctuation, okay? So you'll have that if you have students that need that explicit instruction. I dare say many of them do. This is one of my favorite quotes about the importance of oral language and talking to and with kids, that reading and writing float on a sea of talk. And this little diagram shows the interconnectedness between and among listening, speaking, and reading and writing. We have, oops, my cursor's not working. We have oral language, listening and speaking. We have written language, reading and writing. We have receptive language that includes listening and reading, and expressive language that includes speaking and writing. And I always like to talk about those 4 language systems because we're really thinking about the integration of all 4 of them throughout every, maybe not every lesson, but almost every lesson, and certainly throughout the day. I also mentioned yesterday something called Voice 21 and Oracy, and I don't know if this link is live. I don't think it is. So let me do this. If I have time tomorrow, I might play this video, but let me just click on it right quick and show you the website and encourage you to check this out. The website has lots and lots of excellent information. Oracy is a term I've really not heard a lot about before, but it's a term that's widely used in England. And this Voice 21 organization happens to be in England. And there's lots of wonderful videos on this website that give you a flavor for what oral language could and should look like, I believe, in classrooms. So take a look at that. Enos, I'm sure you'll put that in our chat for us, as you've been very kind to do. But I can't stress enough the importance of getting kids to speak and listen to one another, and it's good prep for their written expression exercises. But today, we're going to really talk about the link between writing and text comprehension. And this quote by Chin, that teaching syntax in the context of writing is much more effective than putting worksheets in front of kids. We know that. The worksheets were what I did, and probably many of you did. They really don't transfer. And so at the end of the day, if this work doesn't transfer to our students' outcomes, then it's wasting their time and our time as well. So students, and the other point that's made here is, as students write complex sentences, it actually transfers to reading comprehension because they're reciprocal skills. They're inextricably linked. Now, today you're going to hear me reference a few things, a little bit of this book called Framing Your Thoughts, which is where I learned a lot about teaching sentence structure. I will tell you up front, it is no longer in print. And I looked online the other day, and it's some astronomical amount of money to buy this book. So don't even try. Although someone told me that Haggerty is now distributing it. So I don't know if that's true or not. It might be, and if it is, I recommend that you, if it's affordable, you take a look at that. Sentence Sense, Writing Matters are the books that I pulled from for today's activities. In some cases, William Van Cleve. I also highly recommend that you take a look at this. Some of you may know Pam Kasner. Pam Kasner is an amazing woman who's worked at Pennsylvania Technical Assistance Network for many years. This is our beloved William Van Cleve. In this collection, you have lots and lots of information, including some of his webinars that are free to watch. Just lots of great information. So if you want to really immerse yourself in writing, and specifically writing sentences, this is a wonderful resource for you. And the other one that I did not, and I have the Writing Revolution, and you're going to see a lot of reference to that today. And the other that I did not include, and my bad, on this page, so please forgive me, Charlie Haynes and Jennings, Terrell Jennings, but this is a fantastic book as well, From Talking to Writing. It is really the program that's been used at Landmark School, which is a very renowned school for kids with learning disabilities in Massachusetts. But the book is excellent because we know that children with language-based learning disabilities struggle with oral expression, right? Speaking and listening. And certainly if they're going to struggle with oral language, they're going to struggle with written language. So I'm sharing a lot of resources today from this book, and I just wanted to put it on this page. It's also going to be in your reference list that you'll get at the end of the day tomorrow. When we look at students' writing, I want you to think about looking at their writing from two perspectives. So there is their ability to generate sentences, written expression, certainly orally too, but we're going to see what can they produce, but also their ability to analyze sentences. So again, these are reciprocal skills, and you can sort of look at their writing and get insight into both, right? If you ask them, and we're going to talk about this today, to summarize something they've read, you're going to know a lot about did they get it or not by what they produce in their writing. So that's 2 points of view that are important. And Judy Hockman and Natalie Wexler, the co-authors of The Writing Revolution. I see it behind you, Martha. It's a fantastic book. Then that they said that the writing provides a window on the level of understanding, right? Because we can ask kids to write something. It doesn't have to be lengthy, and we'll figure out pretty quickly what they don't understand and what further information they need. I think it's the best exit ticket you can ask for. If it's quick and dirty, right? Before they leave your class, ask them to write a sentence, whatever your topic was for the day. Tell me what you learned today. What was the concept we talked about? What is a clause? Whatever it is, you're going to find out pretty quickly. Not only can they write, can they put a sentence together, a coherent sentence, but did they get what you taught them that day? Again, very important for you to know. And there's two primary purposes for sentence level activities, which is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. And that is, we've talked a lot in the last couple of days about increasing their syntactic awareness. This is what will happen as a result if you spend time teaching the sentence level writing. They'll also write more sophisticated sentences, all the types of sentences we've been talking about. And it also will help with their revising. The revising and editing, that's a big part of the writing process that kids really struggle with because it's so vast. So coming back to our rope and thinking about where does that rope fit into a writing graphic? And this is, I know that this is like a crazy graphic organizer, but let me unpack it for you quickly. Thinking about writing as a cognitive and linguistic process. It's both. Okay, so if we think about it as a cognitive process, that's where the writing process comes in. Because what do you have to do to write? What's cognitive about it? Pop your ideas into the text, into the chat box. Okay, good. Idea generation, formation, ideas. Yep. What else do you have to do cognitively to produce a written piece? Let's say an essay. Vocabulary certainly is part of it. Yep. Good. You have to think of ideas. You have to remember ideas. You have to organize. Yay. Definitely organization is part of it. Yes. Remember, right. Remember the previous sentences. So working memory is important. Very much so, Sarah. And so if you look at this left part of the graphic organizer, you see underneath the writing process, I've written executive function. That's what the process is. It's executive function. Do you all have kids who have executive function / ADHD issues? Of course you do. They're everywhere. Those students are going to struggle with that aspect of writing, among other things. But certainly that cognitive ability to organize, to draft, to revise, to go back and reread, all of those things are inherent in writing. So now if I look at the other side of this graphic organizer, this is where we could think about the linguistic process, writing as a linguistic process. And if you think about the rope, we have language comprehension and word recognition, right? So on the word recognition side of this, we have kids who have to transcribe their ideas. Only way they're going to do that is if they can write the words, if they can spell them. Do they know writing conventions? These are considered lower level transcription skills, right? And that's the stuff that we do teaching foundational skills. And please don't forget and leave out handwriting, because that's important. If you don't have the motor memory of how those letters are formed, that is going to trip you up when you go to write the word. Even though they're considered lower level, that doesn't mean they're not important. Spelling is considered a lower level transcription skill, but it's hugely important for developing orthographic mapping and reading fluency. So on this other side, we have text generation, right? You have to have background knowledge and vocabulary knowledge, which many of you put into the chat, but you also have to be able to write those sentences. And this is where the syntax and semantics comes in. All right. And if you notice at the bottom, I put self-regulation, because self-regulation, is again, all about writing, or I should say writing is all about self-regulating. And a very well-respected program called Self-Regulated Strategy Development, SRSD, which I'm not going to talk about today because it's not specifically talking about sentence level writing, but it's a goodie. SRSD. I'm sure Enos will find the link and put it in the chat. Thank you very much. Any questions about this? I know this is very detailed. Hope it's helpful. Heidi, you wrote the cognitive load for writing is huge. They're still working on Prince concepts, right? And all the other processes. And that's exactly right, is you have to manage all these things simultaneously. And that's what makes it challenging. But we have to chunk it for them, right? Somebody had a great question. Let me go back to the chat. Sarah asked, would you think that children who reference the text a lot in their production of written summaries an indication that they don't automatically comprehend the syntax? I'm not sure I understand that question, Sarah. Do you want to come off mute and ask it?
I'm just thinking about those students who, when they're writing something, if it's like a comprehension type question, if they keep on going back to the paragraph to really look at all the details, is it that they comprehend what they're, do you know what I mean? If it's automatic, or do they need to kind of do what we're doing and think of the sentence parts and who is doing this? Like, but with their first reading, it's not something that is a skill for them.
Yeah, it's not automatic. They're not, I think that's probably the case. Hard to say without knowing the student. It could be working memory too. So they have, they have to go back and reread it because they didn't hang on to it.
Would there be anything that you would do differently for those students in that circumstance? Or
I mean, I like the idea of having them reference the text. So I think it's really good to say, go back to the text and show me where you found that, because that's a skill that we all do and all use. So, I think you would, over time, you would try to remove the text and see if they can do it without referencing the text and increase the length of the passage. Start with something short with a few sentences and see if you can increase over time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I'm going to move on. This comes from an article that I put into the handouts, and I'm going to show you that in a second. So this is your handout folder. And in this is the article I'm referencing, and this is published in Perspectives these articles are so good. If you don't think you can, like, you have to be a member of IDA to access these articles. However, a little trick to tell you about if you don't already know it. If you go to Google Scholar and type in the article, I would say 90% of the time it's available on for free. So I don't feel like I'm violating copyright when I do that. And that's important to me. I don't want to, let's just see what happens. So if you look over here, there's a link that tells me that it's in the public domain. I can click on it and access it, which is why I gave it to you and felt comfortable doing that. Okay. If you, just in case you weren't aware of that. So you're going to see a number of slides today from that article, which I, again, find very, very helpful, because Charlie Haynes and Jennings, his co-author, spend a lot of time teaching teachers about the whole complexity of teaching writing systematically and explicitly. And what they suggest that you do is that you use theme-centered pictures and objects to activate prior knowledge, that you're going to teach a developmental sequence of sentence patterns, which I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides. Definitely work on verb tense, and that's something that many kids struggle with, particularly your multilingual learners. And I'll show you kind of how they address that. And then employing listening, speaking, reading, and writing, because again, bringing oral language and written language together is really important. So one of the activities that you're going to see in the handout is a kernel sentence. And let me just show you what this looks like in the handouts. So all the handouts that I'm referencing are here. This is from their book, and there's several templates that I'm going to share with you. So when you're teaching the kernel sentence, you're going to make sure they know they have to have an article. They don't always have to have an article, but they might or might not. And then they're going to write their subject or their noun or their namer and their action word. So it's a very easy template. You're going to see other templates like this. Let me show you this one. These are templates for adding a where phrase, for adding an adjective before the noun, a when phrase, etc. And they're just really helpful to scaffold students who need that type of scaffolding. They need a template to produce the sentence structure that you're asking them to produce before they can do it without that scaffold. Okay, so let me go back to my PowerPoint. Okay. So where would we begin? With students that have trouble writing a simple sentence, we would use that template. But before we do that, we could create these noun and verb boxes, and you'll read more about it in the article. But you basically pick a theme, pick a topic, like the prior slide said, show pictures. This happens to be about sailing, and have the kids orally generate a list of nouns and verbs. Okay, and then they're going to use those texts, that noun and verb box, to create kernel sentences. I mentioned that there's a sentence hierarchy. Okay, so we start with the kernel sentences with nouns and verbs, and then we're going to start to expand the noun with, the verb with a where phrase, and then we're going to do an adjective phrase, right? Which deck, or what about the deck? It was a slippery deck. And so all of these templates scaffold the student's ability to increase the complexity of the sentence. And you'll see this whole hierarchy is referenced in the article that I just showed you. The other thing that's talked about in the article that I think is extremely helpful and important is this idea of integrating a listening task first, then a reading task, then a production, a spoken oral expression task, speaking, and then the final is to get it in writing. So you're scaffolding them by doing this. And the article really does a nice job of explaining that. Once they're good at writing kernel sentences, we're going to have them expand the kernel sentences. And again, I showed you the template. This is the where phrase, the when phrase, the where phrase with adjectives, the where and when phrase, fully expanded kernel sentence. And so how are we going to actually scaffold that? We're going to do that the same way we did when we talked about expanding the sentences orally. We're going to use those function-based questions when the students are writing. So it's the same process. If they've just written a simple kernel sentence, dogs bark, we're going to say, which dogs barked? When did they bark? How did they bark, etc. And this is another activity that's in your activity folder. You know, if you know the Writing Revolution, you know this. You can also access resources online at the Writing Revolution website. Book resources, you just have to sign up for an account, but their book resources are free. And I went back to them last night when I was finishing up for today, and they've added more stuff. They've been, very generous with sharing resources. So this is a template. It's a fillable template that you can have the students do electronically, or you can do that with them. But this very important quote about the importance of summarizing and sentence expansion, they're actually very similar, right? Figuring out what's most important in a given body of information, what details support the main idea, and how the details relate to one another. That's really at the heart of this. So you have the who and the what, right? Doing something, when, where, why, and how. And then they write their summary sentence after they've explored and answered those questions. Another approach, and something that we often do with young students, is we ask them to shrink the paragraph. And it begins with the who or what. So naming the most important who or what, telling the most important thing about the who or what, and saying the main idea in 10 words or less, which is hard, but that's the point of this exercise. So I'm going to show you this video, and then you'll see in the handouts a copy of the poster and also a lengthy description, if you want to do this, about how to do it. So I'll show you the video, and then I'll show you the handout.
The most important what is the baby panda. Okay. The most important thing about what is that it doesn't look like it at first, but it does when it goes
Okay, so Hazel, I didn't understand that. What was the most important thing about the baby panda in the paragraph you read? What was it saying about the baby panda?
At first, it doesn't look like it's one.
Oh, at first, it doesn't look like the baby. Okay, I see. All right, keep going.
Okay. The baby panda jumps up. At first, it doesn't look like.
Almost
Baby pandas don't look like their mothers at first.
Perfect, you got it. Okay, keep going. Oh, it's Maylee's turn, right?
Yeah.
So I love that video, and it really, demonstrates, an activity that you can do pairing your kids up. They had the little paragraph shrinking card, and they worked with each other. It's a great way to engage them in dyads, and it's a hard skill for some kids. I will say that, you know, this group, obviously, Lindsay Kemeny had taught them the procedure, which is really, really important. And I will show you, there's a poster here, and I put it as a Word document so that you could make it as big or small as you would like to. Just make sure you put the attribution, because Lindsay Kemeny made it. Also, there's a really great lengthier description about the routine for teaching paragraph summarization that is here, that was adapted from PAL's program. And this is really explicit demonstration, you know, how to teach that routine for students that need that explicit instruction. Another way to think about this is something called Get the Gist. And Get the Gist is part of that collaborative strategic reading that I mentioned yesterday. It's one of the steps that we have our students think about when they're trying to comprehend what they're reading. But it's the same ideas, right? So they have to identify the most important what, the most important, sorry, I'm not reading this correctly. I got to move you guys around. The who or what, and then the most important information about the who or what, and combine it to write a just statement. And you have in your handouts a log that you can use for your students to do this, because the expectation is that they're going to write it. In the video you saw, the kids were just orally producing those sentences. Ultimately, we want these kids to write it. So I'm going to ask you to take a paragraph from your text right now, and I want you to think about how you could, what you would expect your student to write as a just statement from the book that you brought. You could do this with narrative or informational. It's probably, I would say, more applicable or relevant for an informational text, but there's no reason why you couldn't have them do that for a descriptive paragraph from a narrative text. So I'll give you a couple minutes to work on that, and then I'd love for you to share with me what you came up with. So Heidi wrote, Billy was new to town and needed a room. So the gist, you've got Billy as the who, and what did he do, or what was the action he needed? First, he was new to town, and what did he needed a room, okay? I don't know the context, but I'm sure that summarizes pretty well. Anybody have another just statement? Amanda, the girl looked around but could no longer see the wolf. Excellent. Evelyn Glennie, a deaf girl, learned how to play the drums by feeling the vibrations. Nice. That's a little more than 10 words probably, but not many. So you can bend it a little bit. Bailey mistook a skunk for a cat and got sprayed. Nice. Beautiful. So good. Thank you, Martha. Boa constrictor asked a man to stop chopping a tree. Oh, is that, what's the name of that book? I know it. I love that book. Oh, yeah, The Great Kapok Tree. That's a goodie. Love it. Human actions have caused a loss in biodiversity. Nice. You can do this, obviously, with any text, and it's actually really helpful. And what I would recommend, thank you, Louis. I love it. That's great. I don't know that book, but it sounds like fun. Let them have tacos, of course. Got to keep the toppings mild. Love it. Be curious to know what that book is. Anyway, what I was going to say about this gist writing is that you can have them, Dragons Love Tacos. Of course, that's the name of the book. I'm going to write that down. Have them, do this for a series of paragraphs, right? So they have to do a just statement for a paragraph, and then ultimately you can stretch it. If you're reading a chapter book, see if they can write a just statement for the entire chapter. Because summarization, as I've said, is a very challenging skill for many. Tash tried to use the force for the first time. Nice. Okay, thank you for doing that. And this is an easy thing to do with your students if you haven't done it before. Definitely recommend trying it out. So I love ReadWorks. I'm sure you all know about ReadWorks. I love it because there's so much there that you can access in terms of passages. This is just one I selected to demonstrate or illustrate a couple of ideas that I wanted to share with you. Some of the passages are better than others, but it's all good. So we want students to write a sentence summary, right? We saw the writing revolution example of that. This is the same idea, but on this case, we would put these questions on a pocket chart or index cards on a pocket chart, and then ask the students to write a sentence summary. In this case, these are not clicking in order, so I'm just going to put them all out there. So the who or the what are the critters. What did they do? They lived. How many critters were there? There were some. What kind? They were the coolest. And then which ones? Animals and plants. And then what did they do? They lived around icebergs. And how did they live with nutrients that help them grow? This is obviously a dense, paragraph with lots of information in it. So it's not easy necessarily to do this. In my presentation that I did back in the spring, I did a 3-hour syntax, bring your own book syntax party. I showed some slides from that. And I think, Enos, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were given access to that recording that you could watch before attending these workshops this week. If you did attend that series or that session, you'll see some overlap, but I didn't want to repeat too many of the slides. So what I'd like you to do now is select a passage. You could use the same one if you want, and write a sentence summary using the following questions. So this might be a lengthier sentence summary because you're going to include more about the who and the what and what they did, not thinking so much about a 10-word sentence summary, but rather one that has more descriptors. So what might be interesting to do is take the just statement that you just wrote and see how you might include more information about it to capture more of the details of that particular passage that you looked at. Because you want to give kids an opportunity to not be constrained by the number of words they have to use. Martha asked a really good question. How do we get them to go from, sorry, I just lost it. A boa constrictor asked a man to stop chopping a tree to the more comprehensive, a boa constrictor trying to save the rainforest from deforestation. And yes, I think it's conversation for sure. Certainly an expectation that they would use some vocabulary. And we talked a little bit about vocabulary yesterday and morphology. But deforestation actually is a great word with, with a prefix, a suffix, and a root. And really it's a base word, forest. What about the forest? It's deforestation. What does that mean? So I think that it's conversation. It's talking about the vocabulary words associated with that particular book. If you chose that book because you're learning about rainforests and what happens in rainforests, I think that's also something to consider. But it's oral language is such an important part of this. And it's right. Heidi said it's going from specific to general, right. Okay, so Lewis expanded her sentence to say the boy held a taco party for the dragons, but he didn't read the fine print. I love it. That's exactly right. You now have a clause you now have a compound sentence with two clauses, two independent clauses. And I think that's what I'm looking for, is the more detail. So you want to explain to them that there's cases where you want to be really succinct, and there are other cases where you want them to do more of the expansion. Tash tried to use the force for the first time by elevating her necklace. Great. Nice. Those great example, Rebecca. Yeah. So again, lots of this is done orally to get it into their writing. And now, yesterday we talked a little bit about cohesion and coherence. So I want to take some time to explain that, and so give some examples and show what I mean by that. When we talk about cohesion, it's how sentences are related to one another. And obviously, you're not reading one sentence at a time. You're reading one sentence and the next to create something called a mental model or a situation model. Is that a term that's familiar to people? The mental model or the situation model? So Beth's shaking her head no. No. Okay, good. All right, most of you have not heard of that. So let me take a second to explain the mental model. The mental model was something that some researchers came up with as a way of explaining the process of reading comprehension versus thinking about reading comprehension as answering questions when you get to the end of the passage. We want our kids to understand that it's a process, that it unfolds, versus I'm going to get to the finish line and then I'm going to answer these questions. What you want to convey to them is that they're always going to be thinking as they're reading. That's metacognition, right? And they have to stop reading when it doesn't make sense. And that's why I love collaborative strategic reading, because it was called years ago click and clunk. And the idea was that when you're reading and it makes sense, it clicks. All of a sudden, a clunk can occur. Why does the clunk occur? You come to a vocabulary word you don't know. You read a sentence and you go, oh shoot, I forgot who this sentence is about. I have to reread it. So those clunks necessitate using what's called a fix-up strategy. And again, I can't say enough about this whole methodology. Collaborative strategic reading. It's brilliant. Sharon Vaughn and her colleagues at the University of Texas, Austin. And there's a lot of free information on their website about it. But all that to say, this idea that we're creating a mental model and it happens over time. And it happens because you have background knowledge about the topic you're reading about, hopefully. And if you don't, then you, the teacher, have to figure out how you're going to support kids' development of background knowledge. Otherwise, it's all going to be Greek to them, right? So this mental model is created as you go. You take what you know, you read something in the text, you assimilate it with what you know, or you have to reconcile it with what you know. You might have thought something differently, and it's an active process. And this idea of cohesion is inherent in that process, because in order to make the mental model, these sentences that you're putting together have to be coherent and cohesive. And the way that happens is through sentence structure and word choice, which is why a book is leveled based on the sentences, right? The length of the sentence, the complexity of the sentence, and then what kind of vocabulary is included. I'll stop there. I said a lot. Any questions about what I hope what I explained makes sense. And thank you for putting that chat in there, Enos. It's a great resource for collaborative strategic reading. Does my explanation of the mental model make sense? Good. Okay. So why is cohesion so important when we think about grammar? It's where grammar and comprehension actually meet, because the reader has to use the grammatical and semantic links, otherwise known as cohesive ties, within the text to connect meaning across sentences. And we're going to talk before the morning is done about sentence combining, because that's a powerful way to build cohesion into text and into our kids' writing. Very powerful. So cohesion relies on what we call cohesive ties. And we talked, I think, Monday about our meaning links, our pronouns, our prepositions, and our conjunctions. Those are also referred to as cohesive ties. We didn't talk a lot about pronouns, so I want to talk a little bit about them because they're everywhere and they can be tricky. So look at this sentence. The parrot's feathers matched the tree's leaves. So they were camouflaged in the trees. And then the next sentence says they were a perfect camouflage. Now, a kid might be confused. Are they talking about the leaves? Is that what the they is? Or are they talking about the parrot's feathers? So we can't assume that kids are seeing the pronoun reference and referring back to the noun that it preceded it. Here's another example in that passage that I showed you, Frozen Home. Petrels and other birds fly between icebergs. They eat krill and fish that live around the iceberg. So the they referring to the petrels and other birds. Cohesion also can be supported through the use of synonym substitution. So look at this example. So which brought a great sense of relief. And now the author is replacing that concept with the word comfort. In the second sentence, the author is going to expand the reader's understanding about berries and referring to the berries as the ripe fruit. In the article that I shared with you, Haynes, Smith, and Laud's article, which again has just a wealth of great ideas, he and his co-authors talk about the cohesion circle. And this is super simple thing to do, right? It's a cohesion circle because our kids tend to repeat the same noun or subject and repeat and repeat. And so when we want to think about expanding their repertoire of writing sentences that have variability and are interesting, this is a simple little process that's described in great detail in the article. But if you look at this little excerpt from a child's writing, what noun phrase are they repeating? Fire truck, right? So we want them to change it up. Instead of using the word fire truck, we're going to ask them to pick a synonym for fire truck. And then when they give us the next sentence, we can ask them to use a pronoun to take the place of the fire truck. And for the fourth sentence, we could ask them to write another sentence, but use another synonym. So here's what the student wrote. And the way that this happens is that you elicit some synonyms and pronouns for that word that you want to replace. So what could that fourth sentence be using a different synonym? Somebody put an idea in the chat for me. And what could that fourth sentence say? Emergency vehicle. Excellent. The emergency vehicle race to the fire, or whatever you want to say to continue to tell the story. Okay, so it's a great activity to help students understand how to write varied sentences. Went from one emergency to another. Excellent. completing that thought. Great. The engine was often seen at emergencies. Love it, Beth. Wonderful. So the engine replacing the word fire truck, or the words fire truck. Lovely. Okay, terrific. So what we have to think about, again, is this idea of tracing the referential chain. This example comes from Framing Your Thoughts, Language Circle Enterprise. Again, a book that, if you could get it, would be worth having on your desk somewhere because it's a great resource. But all the other ones are great too. So you've got lots of good professional resources. So here we have two simple sentences referring to the starfish. So they, referring back to the starfish as animals. I want you to track the referential chain in this passage. Just take a look at it. Take note of the pronouns that are used. And I'm going to show you kind of how this works, because we have they here referring to starfish. Now, the plural starfish, but here we have a singular starfish, and it has it, but it also has them, which again can be confusing, and kids could get lost in those pronouns. We're using the word this animal as a synonym for starfish. And so one way to address this issue is to take a paragraph that has these different referential synonyms and pronouns, and have the kids either draw a arrow from one to another or highlight with different colors the connections. So this color obviously is the starfish. This color is all the references to starfish. So that's pronouns, and some things that we can do with pronouns. And I will also point out, let's see, let me look at my time. I actually have time to do this. I meant to embed this in here, but I forgot to do it. So let me do it right now.
Margie, there's a quick question here. It says,
Oh.
Aaron's asking, are all synonyms for nouns considered pronouns?
No.
No.
Mm-mm. Well, I have to think about that. No, I don't think so. Synonyms could be, yeah, because we have animal, we have, in the case of the fire truck, we have vehicle, those are nouns. It's just really thinking about, there's a difference between a synonym, which is another word for that noun, and pronoun taking the place of the noun. So hopefully that explains that. I wanted to show you this video that shows an activity called point back pronoun.
I'm going to be teaching you about a type of word called a pronoun. Everyone say pronoun. Pronoun. This is a woman. This is a girl. Oh, this is another woman. She's an older woman. Oh, I just used a pronoun. She is an older woman. She is a girl. She is a woman. Whenever we talk about women and girls, we can call them she. If I don't know their name, I can say she. When I see men, whether it's an older man or a very young man, or look, here's another man. When I talk about men and boys, I don't call them she. I don't call them she. I say he is a man, he is a boy, he is a man, he. What if we're not talking about people? What if I'm talking about things like this toy robot? Can I say he is walking? I would say he because he's not a person. This is a toy. Huh. What about a plant? That's not a she or a he. No. What did you say? It is a thing. It. Everyone say it. It. Here's my word. It. Read it. It. I can say it is walking. It is growing. I can use the pronoun it to talk about things. It might be a thing like this. Everyone, what color is it? Very good. Now put that in a whole sentence. Say, it is red. It is red. So sometimes these words pop up when we're reading. And we have to do a really, really, really careful job of reading when we read words like she and he and it, because we have to be thinkers, right? When you're reading and you're sounding out your words and you're working hard, you also have to think about what the story's telling you, right? So sometimes we have to point back. Let me show you what I mean. We have to go back in the text and see who is she. Because sometimes we don't know. And I know you guys have already been talking about namers, right? Namers are nouns that tell a person, place, or thing. And in my sentence, we're going to find out who the person is. Who's the namer in this sentence? So I'm going to read it for you, and you're thinking, who is this sentence about? John likes to play football with Dante. Turn and tell your partner who is in this sentence. I heard two names. And turn back to me. I heard some kids say Dante. Thumbs up if you heard the name Dante. Yes, and here it is with a nice capital D because we put capitals at the beginnings of names. Dante is in this sentence. So what other namer is in this sentence? And John. That's naming a person. We've named two people. So my sentence is John likes to play football. What does John like to do?
Play football.
He likes to play football. That's the action. But then the sentence tells me more. John likes to play football
With Dante.
We know even more about John. What do we know about John and playing football? He doesn't just like to play with anybody. Our sentence is telling us John likes to play football with Dante. Now I have another sentence in my story. That's not just the whole story. John likes to play football with Dante. John likes to play with
Dante.
I could put Dante in, but you know what? Authors like to change it up a little bit. So I want to put one of those pronouns. All right. Are we talking about girls, boys, or things? John and Dante are
Boys.
they're boys. Okay. So I'm going to think about boys. I have a pronoun he. He is a boy. He is a boy. He is a boy. He. I have another pronoun. Him. Everyone say him. Yeah. If I want to talk about him, I can use this word. If I want to talk about him, who's him? Who's he?
Dante.
If I want to talk about Dante, I can use the word him. Let's back up to the beginning. John likes to play football with Dante. Read it with me. John likes to play with Oh, yes, because I am talking about boys. So now I want to use my special pointer. Pronouns point back. That's what it says. Our pronoun is this word. John likes to play with him. Who is this talking about? Who is this pointing back to in this sentence? Who does John like to play with? Dante. Watch. Look at how this word points all the way back to this word. It's the same person. Him refers to Dante.
All right, any questions about that? Nope, okay. Yeah, again, it's very explicit. It's very concrete for kids that really need that explicit instruction. It's very helpful.
So Margie, there's a question here.
Okie doke.
Desiree is asking, could we also include the pronoun they or them when teaching students about pronouns? It would be inclusive.
Yes, and it's funny that you should say that. Thank you for bringing that up, because as I watched that video, I thought the very same thing. We need to update it for sure. So yes, thank you for saying that. It's on my list. It's on my to-do list. Very important. So yes, Beth,
I was just wondering what grade level.
that was believe first.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you for your questions, and Desiree. Yep. I was thinking the same thing as I watched that. All right, so another meaning link that we talked about on the first day are conjunctions. And an activity that you probably have seen if you're familiar with the writing revolution is this activity where the student has the same sentence starter, but they're going to use a different cohesive tie or conjunction. And of course, this clause is going to be different based on that conjunction. And one of the things that we've often do with this activity is once they've generated this sentence, we might move the clauses around. And if we said the weather gets warmer, spring is a terrific season. If we move this around, can we retain this conjunction? The weather gets warmer because spring is a terrific season. What might we put in lieu of that conjunction? So, could you use so? The weather gets warmer, so spring is a terrific season? Possibly. What about this one? It rains a lot, but spring is a terrific season. What might you put in front of this one? You could say, even though it rains a lot. So but because so activity is really great because it helps kids understand those conjunctions have important meaning. But if you move clauses around, which you can, and we encourage you to have kids get used to moving the clauses around, it's going to necessitate changing the conjunction. Not always, but sometimes. So I look forward to it each year because spring is a terrific season. Again, just thinking about how we can expand this activity. Another thing that I noticed on the Writing Revolution website when I went to it yesterday is, I'm moving this around, hold on a second. So I see this single paragraph outline. So once students are able to write sentences, we absolutely want them to put them into a paragraph. And they can continue to use this same format with a topic sentence, your detail sentences, and your concluding sentence. And do that and create an essay with multiple paragraphs. And there's great information in the Writing Revolution about how to do that. The other resource that I love for doing paragraph writing is Diana Hanbury King. Diana Hanbury King was an OG, like considered the grande dame of Orton Gillingham. I see you shaking your head. She's amazing, and her resources are excellent when it comes to explicit instruction and writing, particularly writing sentences and paragraphs and scaffolding for that work. Another resource that I highly recommend that you take a look at is Keys to Literacy. Joan Sedita is the founder and president, and if you look at her, I'll have her name and resource on the handout tomorrow as well. But since we're talking about paragraph writing here, she has these paragraph templates, and they're in your activity handout. And remember, we talked yesterday about informational text having different structures and use and cohesive ties and just language cue words. These templates are in that handout folder, and it's really wonderful when you're teaching these structures and we want kids to write these paragraphs, right, based on whatever that text structure is. They're reading about the difference between frogs and toads. They have their topic sentence. Then they're going to compare their details. One similarity is they both, or however they want to describe the similarities. And then they're contrasting. And it gives them a really nice scaffold for producing a paragraph. Any questions before we move on? I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Is there a template for the activity? For the conjunction activity, Erin, the one that I just described where you might change the order? Is that what you're asking? Oh, you got it. Okay. Okay, perfect. Oh, right. It's in the folder. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so let's talk about sentence combining. Bruce Sadler has written a lot about sentence combining, and there's an article, again, one that appeared in Perspectives a number of years ago, 2018. It's a really great article. I highly recommend that you take a look at it and explain sentence combining. And again, it's really pointing to the fact that we don't have a lot of research on how best to teach sentences, honestly. Steve Graham and his partner, Karen Harris, wrote Strategic SRSD, Self-Regulated Strategy Development, and they've done a ton of research, but there's not a lot of conclusive evidence about how to teach sentences other than sentence combining is one of the most well-researched methodologies for teaching kids to write sentences, complex sentences. And you can read this, more about this in the article that I reference. It's especially true for kids with reading disabilities. And I think that's because kids with language-based learning disabilities, as I said earlier, have trouble orally producing these sentences, and therefore their writing is going to be challenging. So we really have to provide scaffolding, and that's what I love about the sentence combining. So there's another handout that comes from Intervention Central that describes the methodology for teaching sentence combining. So students are presented with kernel sentences, and then they're given explicit instruction in how to weld them into more diverse sentence types by using connecting words, right? And there's a whole order for doing this. So if you look at Bruce Sadler's article, this is a suggested possible sequence for teaching sentence combining. You're going to start with something simple. The man drank the soda. The man was thirsty, right? I'm going to ask the student to produce a simple sentence that combines those two ideas. And the simple in this case, because we just have to say which man drank the soda. It was the thirsty man who did it. And so that's step one. Step two is, and we can come up with lots of ideas for two simple sentences where now they're going to have to change and add an adverb. So the first sentence might be, the man drank the soda. The man drank, the soda was, what's the best way to say this? The man drank quickly, right? The man drank the soda quickly. So it's very scaffolded. The second step in the sequence would be to combine subjects, compound subjects, and objects, right? And remember, we said simple sentences can have compound subjects and compound objects. So that's a very simple task. Now, the next task in the order would be to use the conjunctions and but to combine two independent clauses, right? Another step in the hierarchy would be to have them produce possessive nouns. Another step is producing sentences with adverbial clauses, using those connecting words because, after, until, when. Those are those subordinating conjunctions. There's a whole hierarchy for doing this, and it actually is a very effective way to teach sentence combining. And there's workbooks galore. Just Google it. They're actually even in the public domain. I'm not a big fan of workbooks because I don't want you to just hand the workbook to the kid and have them go lockstep through filling out those pages. But if it's accompanied by explicit instruction and you do the modeling of the activity and then give them that independent practice or do guided practice with them and go to independent practice, I think it's an effective way to teach this. Certainly, if we're thinking about kids who produce simple sentences and they're simple sentence, one after the next, and what's missing is the conjunction joining the sentence. What I recommend that you do is pull those simple sentences out of their text that they're writing and say, you could combine these two sentences and scaffold it. If it means giving them a word bank with those conjunctions that they could choose from, that's one way to do it, right? In this case, we have Goldilocks was hungry. She broke into the bear's home. We're going to ask them to find a fanboy that works here. Goldilocks was hungry, comma, so she broke into the bear's home. The bears were surprised to see Goldilocks in their bedroom. They didn't get angry. You could say, but they didn't get angry, right? So it's really an easy-ish activity to get them to understand how to connect those ideas. I want to also acknowledge the syntax project, because there is a ton of amazing information in the folder that I was granted access to. Enos, I think, is that something that people are using throughout Ontario that you're aware of?
Yeah, so in Ontario, we have an SLP, Melinda, I think her name is, and she's actually adapted the syntax project work to the Ontario scope and sequence. All of the Ontario versions can be found on the ONlit website for grades 1 to 5. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And the syntax project started, I believe, in Australia. And it was shared with you all, and I've now shared it with others because it is amazing. So this is just an example of one of the things that I found in the syntax project. As I alluded to before, the I do is the explicit instruction where you're going to read, in this case, two simple sentences. You're going to identify the independent clauses, right? We have two independent clauses here, spewed out, where of the crater, which crater of the volcano, right? Another simple sentence, it flowed down the hillside. Here we have the pronoun reference referring back to the lava. We're going to circle the subject, underline the predicate, and choose a coordinating conjunction. to use, and those conjunctions are listed down here to show what it means to join two independent clauses. So they actually show the answer. And right. So this is, like I said, incredibly comprehensive. I'm just going to show you, for those of you who may not know where this lives. Let's see if I can find it easily. That's not what I was looking for. I believe I have Syntax Ontario. Oh, here we go. So I didn't download everything because there's so much. There are some kindergarten too, Enos, I found.
Yes, there's one that's kindergarten. I believe it's called, oh, I can't remember, something about big sentences for small learners.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is in kindergarten. We're learning to speak in full sentences. I mean, it has the whole PowerPoint that you can use in your class. And then it gets increasingly more sophisticated or specific depending on, you know, what your goal is. But it has the presentation, the I do, what the concept is, what the learning objective is. I mean, it's brilliant, really. Have you all are aware of it, I'm assuming? Yes? Oh, I see, Enos, big sentences by little learners. Gotcha. Oh, nice. Okay. I might not have seen that, so I'm going to take, oh, that's great. Fantastic. Melinda Hinch. Amazing. Is that something that I can share with other people as well?
I believe so. It's on the ONlit website, so it is open source, available for use.
Nice. Wonderful. So, I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about the last few days, and certainly a lot of what we've been talking about today with regard to writing, you can use those PowerPoints. They're so well done. And I just lifted a few slides. I'm trying to move my thing over and it's not letting me do it. Why not? Hold on. Yeah, so I just pulled a few just for, you know, illustration sake. And this is a we do. So we're going to do this together. And again, this is combining sentences with a relative clause. And it has the bank here, relative pronouns, relative adverbs. And that's that. Now I finished early today. So I have plenty of time for questions. Angela's asking a question. Hang on, let me answer that question. Let me go back to the chat. Would you follow this format for adolescent learners? I mean, it really depends on the kids. I find that adolescent learners haven't learned the basics of grammar and syntax, many, because teachers admittedly say, I don't know how to teach it, and therefore they might teach it, but it's not explicit instruction that transfers. So I feel like the adolescent learners could benefit from it. I think that key with adolescents is using the text that you're teaching them with, which is why I asked you to bring a book, because I want you to consistently think about the text you're teaching versus taking, like, you know, the syntax project is awesome. It has examples. I'm not suggesting that you redo that necessarily, but when it comes to transfer, and making sure your students can transfer to the text that you're asking them to read, that's key. And so whenever and however you can pull sentences out of their text that you know are going to be confusing to teach a concept. For example, if you're teaching adverbial phrases, then you're going to look for sentences in their text that have adverbial phrases, right? It just makes sense. It gives them an opportunity for those who are struggling with reading fluency to read a text several times because they get better, obviously, with practice. So there's lots of good reasons for doing that. Tomorrow, I'm going to spend time talking about, lesson planning, because it's come up the last couple of days. Where does this fit in? How do I do this? I think Beth, was it you who asked, where does the analysis fit in? I want to think about that. Where does it fit in? It's really probably done pre-teaching, but there are times when kids are going to benefit from you doing a deeper dive into, for example, analyzing a sentence. And I don't know what your circumstances are. Like, most of you are gen ed teachers, as I understand it. So if you're a gen ed teacher, you have 20 plus kids in your class. Is that right? And I know you're being asked to do the impossible, which is to differentiate for 20 students who, if you're a first grade teacher, you might not have as wide a range as if you're a fourth grade teacher, right? Because presumably first grade, you're going to have kids that are, maybe pre-alphabetic readers. And then you're going to have kids who are learning how to decode. And then you have kids who already know how to read. But in fourth grade, you probably have a range that even spans more grade levels, which would necessitate even more differentiated instruction. And how do you do that? Right? That's the biggest challenge. How do you actually do that effectively?
Margie,
27 students. Wow.
Yeah. So Margie, I had a question that came directly to me, and it might have come directly to you as well, just to give you a little bit more context about Ontario. I'm going to read it to you. It says, I am really enjoying this, and so many light bulbs are going off after 20 years of teaching. I wanted to let you know that a whole lot of us in Ontario teach in French immersion. More than half the kids in my board are in immersion now. The big city kids in Toronto and Ottawa even are ELLs. And as a result, I have only 1 hour of language per day, less with snowsuits. My frustration is that I feel I don't have enough time for everything. And our kids have no English instruction in grade 1 at all. I know there is a transfer between languages, but any thoughts on condensing in language planning tomorrow would be very much appreciated. So eager to hear your fourth day and put it all together. This has been incredibly worthwhile. Thank you.
I'm so happy to hear that. That's music to my ears.
I don't believe the struggle is real.
Yeah,
time is limited.
Oh, okay. So Catherine, you did send that to me. I'm going to cut and paste from the chat. Thank you so much for the question. And I'm going to ponder that question between now and then. I actually have a team with me today. As I said, my team is back. I can hear them chit-chatting in the next room, which is lovely. And I'll ask them too, like, what do they recommend? The biggest commodity, the most precious commodity, I should say in another way, is time. We never, ever have enough time to do the job that we're asked to do. The second most precious commodity probably are resources. Like, do we have the goods to get the job done? That's why I absolutely love and respect and appreciate things like the syntax project, because I don't have to create those slides. They're there. Now, do I have to modify? Yes. Do I have to plan to teach that well? I can't just walk into the classroom and say, here we go. I have to understand first how I'm going to address the needs of my learners. And that's why, I'm happy to present this content to all of you and I'm so happy to hear light bulbs are going off, because in order for you to teach syntax, you have to understand it first. And that's what these 4 days are really about, are understanding the complexity of syntax. And it's okay to say to your kids, this is hard for me. This is not something that comes easy to me either. I'm learning some of this right along with you. That goes a long way when we can share with our students that we're learning, we're lifelong learners. We expect them to be lifelong learners as well. Let's see, I'm going to go back and read some more questions here. So Aaron, you asked if this is an okay time task. What are considered to be the elements of text? When you say the elements of text, Aaron, tell me more about that. What do you mean by that? That's the wording in the curriculum. Okay, I got you. I don't know. That's pretty vague for me. What does that mean? Elements of text. I mean, I think about the words, the sentences, the ideas, the structures, if you could tell me more, that would be helpful. But fitting things in seems like a common question. And oh my goodness, Catherine, no tier 2 support. Oh, Lord have mercy. I mean, so you, the gen ed teacher, which the vast majority of you wear that hat, are expected to differentiate for kids of all circumstances in terms of their abilities and their where they are in their knowledge. So, and that is happening more and more in the States as well. I mean, we had ARPA funding, ESSER money, right, for a few years because of COVID. That money is gone at the end of this year for us. And so a lot of our school districts have had to cut coaches, they've cut reading interventionists, they've cut really important staff that were supportive for you, the gen ed teacher, to get that differentiated instruction for your struggling readers. So, oh my goodness. And then Tanya, no support for the split grades where they have the ALL and special needs students. Wow. There's so many, yeah, thank you. There's so many good questions you're asking. So many good questions. Before you leave, it would be great if you, Brittany, if you could launch that last poll, just so I can get a sense where people are after today's session. And then we can adjourn a few minutes early. Thank you, Brittany. Well, it's wonderful to see that you can take some of this into your classroom, 65% so far, which is amazing. Thank you. I'm glad that this was helpful. Most of you said this was relevant information, which again, that's my end goal. So I'm grateful that that's happened. I'll give you a couple more minutes or a few more people that haven't responded yet. Thank you for hanging in for the duration, day 3. I'll end the poll, and any last burning questions that anyone has before I let you go? Yeah, Tanya, thank you for saying that about, I agree that the syntax instruction seems to apply for writing for a lot of people versus reading. I think it's the sentence deconstruction part of reading comp that maybe you can think about how that can apply those questions that you ask to help the students deconstruct complex sentences, like the ones we looked at yesterday. But we can certainly talk more about that again tomorrow.
Can I add a comment there, Margie? Sorry,
Yeah.
this is something that I find very fascinating as well. And Tanya, I agree with you entirely. What I think I find is, especially in the younger grades, the sentence syntax that we're deconstructing in what we're reading is often more complex than what we're asking them to do in writing. So exactly what Margie said is really looking at that functional approach and taking, when we're reading a text, finding that passage or that sentence that might be posing some comprehension issue and deconstructing it with students. Not that we would ever expect them to recreate that kind of syntax in their writing. So in the earlier grades, it's a fine balance, actually, even in the older grades, because we always want to be stretching. We want to be providing models of more complex syntax in what we read to them or what they're reading, but then helping them deconstruct it. That's what I find.
Well put. Beautiful. Thank you, Ines. That was an excellent explanation. Really helpful.
Okay, and just to, okay, so what you just said, Ines, for younger students who aren't able to, who maybe aren't reading or writing, then we're exploring it in the oral. We're
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
That
And that's why,
progression.
yeah, no, that's really, really important point, Beth, because, you know, I am such a firm believer that language we have it in the core of our reading wheel for a very, good reason.
Right.
And I can't say enough. If I wasn't as old as I am, I'd go back and get a speech and language degree or, get a PhD in linguistics because I find it so important and fascinating, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to spend my time continuing to work with teachers and trying to figure the best ways to translate this information so that it's not off-putting for teachers, in turn, not off-putting for kids, but they see the benefit of understanding some of this. And, just to recap tomorrow, I am going to be, talking about lesson planning. I'm also going to talk about the pedagogy of instruction and just reinforce some of the good principles like diagnostic prescriptive instruction. We'll talk a little bit about assessing syntax. We'll talk a little bit about, I've got a laundry list of things